Hi Antonio. Well, this week I am wondering if you can tell me what a poltergeist is and if you can tell me anything about the term poltergeist. Thank you.
If you viewed my last week's Q&A, you might remember that I mentioned a poltergeist case as one of my memorable paranormal experiences. This week's question will allow me to expand on that memory and experience. However, before I begin delving into this subject, I would like to point out something about this field. In the ghost hunting field, we have several disciplines on how investigators approach their investigations. There are two main approaches that most investigators subscribe to. One is the field of parapsychology. The definition of parapsychology is the study of alleged psychic phenomenon, extrasensory perception, such as in telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, or better known as telekinesis, and other paranormal claims. Two is the field of spirituality. The meaning of spirituality has developed and expanded over time. In general, it includes a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, and it typically involves a search for meaning in life. I will attempt to answer this question from these two disciplines. With that out of the way, let us begin with the common accepted definition of poltergeist. The word poltergeist is German for noisy ghost or noisy spirit. This type of ghost or spirit is allegedly responsible for physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects being moved or destroyed. They are capable of pinching, biting, hitting, and tripping people. Most accounts of poltergeist describe the movement or levitation of objects such as furniture, silverware, or noises such as knocking on doors. In short, they are described as troublesome spirits who haunt a particular person instead of a specific location. Such alleged poltergeist manifestations have been reported in many cultures and countries around the world. Early claims of spirits that supposedly harass and torment their victims date back to the 1st century, but references to poltergeist became more common in the early 1600s, and a good example would be the drummer of Tedworth, or also known as the Demon of Tedworth. Supposedly this case began in 1661, in which a vagrant drummer was taken before a justice of the peace and deprived of his drum. The instrument was found in the house of Mr. Moppeson. Later disturbances broke out in the house. Loud knockings and thumpings and the beating of an invisible drum were heard. Articles flew around the rooms, and the beds, particularly those of the children, were shaken. After the drummer was sentenced to leave, the manifestations ceased, but reoccurred once he returned. We head back to one of the earliest accounts of poltergeist activity being reported was from the time period of around 500 CE concerning Saint Germain, Bishop of Auxerre. It seems he was spending the night in a shelter and was bothered by a poltergeist that battered the walls with showers of rocks. Another early case, and which is widely well known, was a case documented by Jacobus de Vergine in his work called The Golden Legend, which was written around 1259 to 1266. This was also better known as the BINGEN poltergeist, and can also be found in the Annals of Fulda. This incident happened near Bingen, Germany, around 856 to 858 CE. The story goes a farmer was plagued by a stone-throwing ghost who shook the walls of his house, as though the men of that place were striking it with hammers, set crops on fire, and also shouted obscenities and accusations at the farmer, suggesting that he had slept with the daughter of his foreman. The poltergeist would follow the man around, and fearful neighbors would refuse to allow him near their homes. Even the Bishop of Mainz sent priests with holy relics who also attested to hearing the poltergeist denouncing the farmer for adultery. When the priest sang hymns and sprinkled holy water, the poltergeist threw stones and cursed at them. Finally, one more mention of an early poltergeist case. This one occurred around 110 AD when Pliny the Younger wrote his famous letters. Pliny was a lawyer, author, and a magistrate of ancient Rome, so he was considered pretty reputable at his time. He wrote hundreds of letters, of which 247 survive today and are considered of great historical value. In Book 7, Letter 27, his writings to Sura, Pliny reported that the specter of an old man with a long beard, rattling chains, was haunting his house in Athens. Alright, now that we're done with the history lesson, let's move right on and jump into parapsychology and see what they have to say that a poltergeist is. A disturbance or energy with bizarre physical effects of paranormal origin that suggests mischievous or destructive intent, such as breaking or moving objects and loud knocks or noises. The disturbance usually centers around an individual, often a child going through puberty, in a stressful house. Alright, now that we have the definition of poltergeist according to parapsychologists, let's look at a few more terms that'll probably be thrown around when you explore more in this field, and it's kind of pertinent to know. So let's take a look at those definitions real quick, and then we'll move on. Now we're going to look at one more term that's important in this field. But I want you to keep in mind what the definition of poltergeist was that we read off in the beginning. So keeping that in mind, with this next definition, you'll be able to tie together what parapsychologists think that poltergeist activity is. Our next term is recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or also known as RSPK. RSPK is the modern interpretation of what was previously called poltergeist activity. It occurs when an individual is present in every case where a poltergeist-like effect is observed. The activity is interpreted as a result of unconscious psychokinesis activities coming from the individual, who is called the PK agent. Parapsychologists have been nice enough to give us a few common denominators in these cases. Although every and each case has its own characteristics and idiosyncrasies, here are some of the trends. A poltergeist agent, usually an adolescent entering puberty and quite intelligent, around whom the strange activities occur. Some sort of repression or frustration of the poltergeist agent by others. A high level of stress in the household prior to the start of the poltergeist activity that continues throughout the case. Poltergeist activity lasts 1 week to several months. Usually the average is 6 months, but however it can last a lot longer. Dramatic events such as unexplained knocking, electrical malfunctions, and movement of objects and furniture. Occasionally reported are levitation of objects, electrical appliances, working without power, and stones falling apparently from nowhere. Rarely reported are strange voices coming from the agent, apparitions, strange odors, or cold spots. That's going to conclude our quick overview of what parapsychologists feel that poltergeist or poltergeist activity is caused by in that. So in our next section of the Q&A, we're going to delve into the spiritual side of what poltergeist or poltergeist activity is. Tulpa is a concept in mysticism of a being or object which is created through spiritual or mental powers. It was adapted in the 20th century from Tibetan Tulpa, which means emanation or manifestation. Modern practitioners use the term to refer to a type of willed, imaginary friend which practitioners consider to be sentient and relatively autonomous. Spiritualist Alexandra David Neal claimed to have observed these mystical practices in 20th century Tibet. She described tulpas as magic formations generated by a powerful concentration of thought. David Neal believed that tulpas could develop a mind of its own. Once the tulpa is endowed with enough vitality to be capable of playing the part of a real being, it tends to free itself from its maker's control. This, say Tibetan occultists, happens nearly mechanically, just as the child, when his body is completed and able to live apart, leaves its mother's womb. She claimed to have created such a tulpa in the image of a jolly friar tuck-like monk, which later developed a life of its own and had to be destroyed. Now that you know a little bit about tulpas and where they come from, let's take a look at one of the most famous alleged tulpas that's been created in the paranormal field. The group was seated around a table with initial seances yielding no contact, no communication, and no phenomenon. Owen changed test conditions by dimming lights and changing the environment to mimic that of a more traditional seance. Participants began feeling a presence, table vibrations, breezes, unexplained echoes, and rapping sounds, which match responses to questions about Philip's life. At one point, the table tilted on a single leg, and at other times moved across the room without human contact. Audio, video, and witness accounts document the paranormal phenomenon. So that concludes a possible spiritual explanation of what poltergeists are or poltergeist activity are. But before I close it off, I wanted to go over my some points from my case that I mentioned last week on why I do believe that it's a poltergeist activity. Well, I hope that answers your question, Jane, and everybody out there. So that'll conclude my video for this week. If anybody wants any more information, they can message us at the social media sites. Or if you want a class, just send us a message asking for a class, and then we can put something more comprehensive together for you. All right, thank you, and I'll see you next week.